Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good morning, my name is Margaret and I'm an addict. Hi. I'd like to thank the Central California Region Convention Committee for inviting me to share, and especially Lisa and Shirley and Cindy and the other two girls that came with them to pick me up. It was like an ovary fest in that van, you know, it was great. The girls were there waiting, and they were doing like little I don't know how they did it, you know. They were doing like little cheers for me, you know, when I got there, and they were so sweet. And Lisa, when she called in to invite me to share, we played phone tag for a little while, and then she finally got a hold of me, and at the end of my machine, when I'm on my outgoing message, I have kisses. It just goes something like that, and that's for KISS, keep it simple, sweetie. And she was so sweet because she goes, you know, Margaret, I knew those kisses were just for me. And it's like, yes, they were, you know, and everybody's been so kind since I've gotten here, and I really appreciate your warmth and your generosity. And I would like to give the convention committee one more hand because I think they did a hell of a job. So thank you. And I want to thank my friend Devin. I love you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time and coming. And I was going to say thanks for coming and playing with me this weekend, but I didn't know exactly how that would be taken. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me. And you know, oh yeah, let's get spiritual. You know, thank you. I appreciate you, and you inspire me in more ways than you could ever imagine. Thanks for being here. Gosh, you readers did a great job. All the speakers did a great job. Jimmy, thank you for your message last night. You truly touched my heart. I want you to know I went up into the room and cried. Thank you so very much. No. Dang it. And Tony, is Tony here, our Friday night speaker? He did a wonderful job to kick off this convention and get it started. And you know, the one thing that I know about me is that when I share my story, there are certain points that I always touch on, and it's because they are very important and they mean something to me, and that's what I share. And I always cry, and I always think, why do they wait till Sunday for me? Because then everybody leaves and everybody's like all crying and stuff, you know, and oh yeah, it was a great convention, bitch, you know. I was in Utah taping a convention, and some girl walked up to me and she said, "Are you Margaret?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "I hate you." And I was like, whoa. And she goes, "I listened to your tape and you made me cry, bitch." And so my new favorite line became, "You say bitch like it's a bad thing," you know? Beautiful, intelligent, talented, creative, and horny, you know? You say bitch like it's a bad thing. That would be me. You know what, there's a couple people here that have heard me share before, and they're here, and they didn't have to be here, and I just want to say thanks. That just makes my heart feel so good. My friend Russell, you know, showed up this morning, and he's heard me share, and Annie is here and you know, Annie was so cute last night. She grabbed me and she gave me a hug, and she said, "I heard you share a couple years ago in Laughlin," and she said, "You really touched me." She said, you touch me like no other woman has. And she just had this, oh no, not like, no, come on, you guys are sick. Okay, whatever. And she said, I want to grow up and I want to be just like you. And I got to say that touched me, because when I was growing up, there wasn't anybody that wanted to be like, I didn't want to be like me. If at any point during my life I could have unzipped my skin and crawled out, I would have. You know, I know that my disease of addiction was full-blown before I ever put up my first drug. You know, I'm not only an addict, I'm a woman who grew up as a molested child, and I talk about that not because it has to do with my disease of addiction, but it has everything to do with how I felt about myself when I was growing up. Because I grew up feeling dirty and ashamed and guilty and confused, and I was angry, and I didn't understand why that was happening. You know, I came from a religious family that my religious system growing up was, if you are good, God will love you and grace you, and if you are bad, God will punish you. And I felt like there must be something very, very wrong with me that God would want to punish me like that. Only at 5 years old, I couldn't figure out what I had done. And I grew up believing that God hated me. I grew up believing that there was something. I wasn't like my sisters and my brother. They were straight A students. You know, they seemed to be able to operate in the world, and I didn't know how to do that. I struggled all the time. I always felt like an outsider, even in my own home. You know what, I ran away from home when I was like 5 years old, and everybody knew I was running away from home. You know, it wasn't any secret. And I left, and I went outside, and I climbed up into the tree. My father had orange trees in our yard, and I climbed up into this tree, and they all knew that's where I was. And my mom brought my sisters and my brother out, and they stood underneath the tree. They didn't look up like that. They pretended like they didn't know I was there. They pretended, you know, they were looking up and down the street for me. And what they said was, we're so glad that she's not here now. That means there's more ice cream for us to eat. And they turned around and they went back inside. And that's how I felt my whole life. Like I just wanted somebody to care. I just wanted to be loved. And you know what, I went back as an adult to my mom and asked her about that situation, and I said, couldn't you have just come outside and said something like, gosh, we really love her and we wish she'd come home? And what I understand is that my mom didn't have the ability to do that at that time. She did the best that she could. And I understand that on some level. But some wounds take longer to heal, and I'm the type of person that, you know what, I used to get beat up a lot. I chose men that were really angry, and what they would do is they would just beat the shit out of me all the time, and it just Reaffirmed for me that's how I felt about myself. I felt like I deserved to be punished, and I would choose people that would do that, and I forgot where I was going with that. I don't even know. I lost my train of thought, just got derailed. So maybe it'll get back on track later. What I know is that, you know, I grew up hating myself, and I hated God because I thought that God was doing this to me. You know what, and I always looked outside of myself to fix what was going on inside. And I kept thinking that, you know what, if I just had the right house or the right car, or the right clothes or the right job, or if the right Mr. Wonderful would just walk through the door, that I'd be okay. And what happened is I spent years trying to find something outside of here because I hated what was going on inside of here. And I did lots of things to hurt myself. I got to the rooms of recovery on April 19th, 1983, and I believe that was the day that I truly surrendered. I need to tell you that I got clean in San Jose, California, and back in the time that I got clean, what San Jose was a recovery community. It was a wonderful recovery community. Communication in unity. It was a community. And you know what? Everybody played with everybody, and it didn't matter what label you Didn't matter what you called yourself. It didn't matter what A you were. You know what I mean? The language was different back then. I came into the rooms of recovery with the language of Jimmy Kay and Pepe, and I've heard people say that that language offends them. And you know what? There's a part of me that just says, that language saved my life. And I know that that gets to be a big controversy, and all I can say is that, you know what, if language was the only thing that was keeping us here, then there wouldn't be any old-timers, you know? We're here because we want to be here, and it doesn't matter what you say you are, what you think you are, or whether you know, or an ANDA or whatever. I don't care. It matters not to me what you think you are. It matters not to me what label you want to put on yourself. You know, I don't think God cares what we call ourselves. I really don't. I don't think God cares. You know, and what I can tell you is that I came into a recovery community that said, do you think you have a problem? And I said, yes. And they said, come here, we have a solution. That was the only requirement for being here. Nobody ever said you can't say that. Nobody ever said, you know, get out of here, we don't want you, you know, you're not like us or anything else. What they told me was look for the similarities, not the differences. They didn't teach me prejudice, they taught me patience. They didn't teach me to put people down or, you know, at no point did God ever die and leave me in charge and make me the recovery police. You know, I thought he did for a while, you know, I did, and I have to own that, you know. I mean, I went through, you know, this spell where I thought that it was my job to get up every day and tell you what you were doing wrong, you know, and what I did was I took steps and traditions and I would use them as clubs to beat people with. Whew. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. I'm grateful. I got to the rooms of recovery and they said things like, go to 90 meetings in 90 days and don't pick up and don't take anything in between. And I thought, okay, I can do that. They said, get the literature and read it because that's what's going to save your life. That's the key to your recovery. And I thought, okay, I can do that. They said, get a sponsor because when you stop using, feelings are going to come up and you're going to need somebody to talk to. And I thought, okay, I can do that. They said, work the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous because that's the key to your recovery. And I thought, okay, I can do that. I didn't know what that meant, you know. And then they said the word God. And I thought, oh, shit, I'm in trouble, man. I don't do God. You know, you don't understand. I'm not talking to God. If I start talking to God, he's going to know where I am and he's going to get me, you know. I spent a lot of years trying to hide from God. I didn't want God around my life. I didn't want God to know where I was, you know. But by the time I made it to the rooms of recovery, I was so willing to do whatever I was told. It didn't matter. I got a sponsor, and my first sponsor was a kindergarten teacher. And I'm so grateful because what she gave me was sandbox recovery. And she just kept it really simple because that's all I could comprehend when I got here. I needed it real simple. And you know what? I hear people that say, yeah, I needed a sponsor to kick my ass, you know, and it's like, if that's what you need, I think that's what you get. You know what? My ass was kicked by the time I got here. I needed somebody to love me, you know, and if I hadn't been loved when I walked through those doors, I don't know that I would have stayed, you know, and they told me, you know what? You'll always get what you need in the rooms of recovery. They said there's a bolt for every nut that walks through the door, you know? And I got a sponsor. And you know what I heard? I heard that I have a disease. I have a disease. It has a name. It's called addiction. I have the disease of addiction. And what they said is, Margaret, it's not your fault. It's not anything I did or didn't do to have this disease. It's just a disease. They told me that I was allergic. They said lots of people are allergic, you know. People are allergic to strawberries. They're allergic to chocolate, you know. You're allergic to drugs, you know. People who eat strawberries and chocolate break out into a rash. They said, you break out too. You break out into assholism, you know. It's like, I understood that, you know. I understood that. My first sponsor started me really early in my recovery through the journey of the 12 steps, and as she took me through the steps, she taught me the principles behind the 12 steps, and you know what, I know there's a lot of different principles for steps, and people, you know, have different ideas of them, and all I can share with you is what I was taught. That's not saying it's right or wrong, and I need to say that, you know what, my recovery is just that. It's my recovery. It's not negotiable. It's not debatable. And unless your face is the face I see in the morning when I get up, if you don't think I'm doing it right, that's okay. You know, you don't have to. You don't have to agree with me. All I'm sharing with you is what happened for me. And, you know, I have like this little shadow side of me that I don't let out that often. And, you know, but every once in a while she just wants to pop her little head up. And you know, when people start giving me shit about the way I've recovered, you know, or am recovering, you know, there's a part of me that just wants to keep loving them and say, keep coming back, you know, it's okay. And then there's this other part of me that wants to say, well, do the words bite me mean anything to you? You know, if you're not going to support me in my recovery, you know, if you aren't part of my everyday walkabout life, you know, and you don't think I'm doing it right, that's okay. Take that opinion to your sponsor. You don't need to share that with me. You know, you don't. It's what you think of me is really none of my business. You know, it isn't. And there's a lot of people who get real tripped out about, you know, I watched people die when I got here because people told them that they shouldn't be taking the medication that was prescribed by their doctors, and I watched them die. They died because they listened to somebody say that. And what my sponsor shared with me about that is that she said, Margaret, as soon as you finish getting your medical degree, you can give somebody an opinion about whether they should be taking medication or not. I don't have a medical degree, and what I know is that it's none of my business how you do your recovery either. You know, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to judge how you do it. I used to, and I worked some steps, and I'm a little bit better now. So, you know, my sponsor started me off really early through the journey of the 12 steps, and in the first step, she taught me about honesty, and the truth is I didn't know how to live without taking something. I didn't know how to be honest with you because I had lost the ability to be honest with myself. And by the time I made it to the rooms, my life had become such an illusion and such a lie, I couldn't distinguish reality from the fantasy anymore. You know, I got to the rooms of recovery. I had the house, the car, the clothes, the jobs, the sick Mr. Wonderful that was beating me up all the time. You know, I had all the outside stuff, and I was dying inside. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see anybody looking back at me. You know, and the truth is that I didn't know what was real anymore. I kept thinking that I was okay because I had a job. You know, I always kept a job, and that was the key for me. As I was always okay as long as I worked. You know, my denial is huge. Denial, D-E-N-I-A-L. Don't even notice I am lying. Denial, you know, and it was really strong in me. In the second step, my sponsor taught me about hope. And you know what she did is she used to have me come over to her house, and I would just follow her around, and what she would do is she would talk about her God. You know, and she would say the coolest things. She would say that her God was warm and kind and loving and sharing and caring and giving, and he was the creator of all beauty and the spirit of the universe, and he had a sense of humor, you know. And I was in awe of the way that she talked about God, you know, and she told me I could borrow her God. And it was like, I didn't know you could do things like that. You know, it was like, whoa, that's cool. You know, and if there's anybody out there that's struggling with the concept of a patriarchal kind of God, you know, if you're having trouble, I don't know, I had trouble with that whole like father kind of thing, you know, and that was hard for me. And so, you know, if somebody once shared with me, you know, if you're having trouble talking to God as a male figure, try talking to God's mom. You know, maybe that will help. You know, whatever works. We can do whatever we need to around here, and I was really grateful for that, because Narcotics Anonymous did not put me in a box. Narcotics Anonymous did not say, this is the only place you can be in life, this is the only thing you can think, this is the only thing you can feel. What Narcotics Anonymous did is it gave me wings to fly. Narcotics Anonymous taught me that I can color outside of the lines, and it doesn't matter what colors I use. Narcotics Anonymous taught me that it's okay to be me. You know, and what my sponsor did is she gave me the gift of her God, and I started my early recovery as my sponsor understood God. And something would happen, man, and I'd call her up and I'd be like, God would think about that? You know, and she would say, Margaret, just don't pick up and don't take anything and keep coming back. We love you, honey, you know, and in the third step, my sponsor taught me about faith. And what I know is that for me, it's about a blind faith. My sponsor used to say things like, you can't see around the corner, but God can. And I would think, what the hell does that mean? You know, I thought they should have had a dictionary for newcomers, you know, just powerless, you know. What the hell does that mean, you know? All the paradox. You have to be vulnerable in order to gain strength. You have to surrender in order to win. It's like, you know, the language was so foreign to me. I didn't understand what that meant. And in the third step, you know, it talked about turning my will and my life over to the care of a power greater than myself. And you know what? That was too big, turning my will and my life. I didn't know what that meant. And someone said, Margaret, you just turn your thoughts and your actions over to the care of God. And I could understand that. I could turn my thoughts and my actions over to the care of God, you know? And I ran around for a long time going, oh, I turned it over and then I took it back. I gave God my will. I took it back. I was like, you know, and I got this vision one day. I had a friend of mine's dog, and I had like this little tug toy, you know, and I'm playing tug of war with the dog, you know, and I got this flash of like God and me and the tug toy's my will, you know, and I'm like in a tug of war with God, you know, and it's my will, and it's like I could ever win a tug of war with God, you know. And what I came to understand is that, you know, my job, it's like God's out here, and God's just God. You know, I don't think God judges us. I don't think God's like, I'm out here doing this, and I think that God just loves me. You know, I don't think God goes, Margaret, get back here. You know, you're not lined up with me. Hey, get back here. You know, I think it's just I think God's just here, you know, and it doesn't matter if I think I'm turning it over or if I think it's, you know what, it's all spiritual. It's all spiritual. Everything is spiritual. You know, they taught me God is all or God is nothing. You know, God is everything, and it doesn't matter, and I'm not in any tug of war with God about who and what I am. What I know is that I'm always in a process in life, and I'm always learning, and I'm always growing. I'm a work in progress, you know, be patient. God's not done with me yet, you know, and I used to run around going, well, what is God's will for me? What is God's will for me? And, you know, my sponsor said, well, why don't you just ask, you know? And what I can tell you is that one of the things that I asked early in recovery was I asked for the obsession, the compulsion, and the desire to use to be removed, and it was. It was. I didn't have a big struggle with wanting to use all the time. You know, sometimes the thoughts would come to my mind, but I didn't have that compulsion and the desire and, you know, just the obsession that we have. That was removed early in my recovery, and I'm very grateful for that. And I believe it was because I asked for it to be removed, you know? In the fourth step, my sponsor taught me about courage, and she taught me that this is a program where we uncover, we discover, and we discard. You know, when I had 6 months of recovery, the guy that I lived with destroyed everything that I owned. He took a knife to all my clothes, all my furniture. He spray painted the whole apartment. Out of all of the stuff that I had, the only thing that was left was 2 boxes of paperback books and some bent up pots and pans. And I thought, nice God you guys gave me. What the fuck is that about, you know? And I learned something so powerful. You know what? I learned that I could lose everything outside of there that I thought meant something to me. And I learned I didn't have to pick up. And I learned I didn't have to take anything. And I learned that there were rooms that I could go to, and I could stand up in front of you and tears streaming down my face going, I don't get it. I don't understand. And you would come up to me and you would hug me and you'd say, Margaret, just don't pick up and don't take anything and keep coming back. We love you, honey. Just don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Just keep coming back no matter what happens. If your ass falls off, pick it up, take it to a meeting with you, you know? Be glad for the weight loss, you know? I don't know, you just kept telling me to keep showing up, you know, and what happened is that there was a guy who at that time had 9 years in the program, and he opened up his home to me, you know, and I moved into his house, and he didn't charge me for rent or the electricity or anything, and not once did he ask me to cook for him, to clean for him, or to sleep with him, you know. And I started to learn about unconditional love, and what I started to learn was that not everybody wants something from me. You know, there are people in this program that just care. You know, they've gone through enough of the healing process, and they know, and they have it to give. They said, we will love you until you learn how to love yourself. You know, we support each other around here. That's what we do. They taught me we don't shoot our wounded. You know, we help to heal you. And I learned God never takes anything away without giving me something better in return. You know, it was a gift. When I had almost a year, people kept saying, oh, try new and different things. So I got married, you know. I'd never done that before, you know, and I just knew that it was God's will for me. I was doing it, you know, I mean, I just knew it, man. I was at a recovery dance. I was right where I was supposed to be. I'm at a recovery dance, you know, and there he is. He walks through the door. You know, I see him from across the room, and he's got this little cowboy hat on, you know, and he's got this little gap between his teeth, you know, and he walks to me, and he asks me to dance, and it was a slow dance, and he took me in his arms, you know, and the poor guy's like shaking like a leaf, you know, and he starts dancing with me, and he's shaking, and I fell in love right there on the dance floor. I thought, oh, God, he needs me, you know? He had a hot 90 days. He was living in a recovery house. I had almost a year, you know? It was like, when I came to understand that, you know, I was a shit magnet. That's what I was. I was just a shit magnet, you know? I didn't tell anybody I was going to get married. I did wait 5 weeks before I got married. I thought that was a long time. I didn't talk it over with my sponsor first. I eloped. I went to Tahoe, and I came back on Monday night, and I went to my home group and said, guess what I did over the weekend? I got married. And everybody in the room just looked at me, and they shook their head, and they went, oh, God, Margaret, just don't pick up and don't take anything and keep coming back. We love you. I was so glad they said that, because about 5 weeks after I got married, I was going flipping nuts. I was nuts, man. I was just losing it. I was stark raving clean. And I was like, I was kicking the dog, and I was throwing the cat against the wall, you know, and I'm screaming at my husband because nothing he did was right. And I didn't understand. You know, I didn't understand. I was doing the deal. I was doing the deal. And for anybody who doesn't know what the deal is, or you want to know the secret of Narcotics Anonymous, this is, in my interpretation, this is it. Number one, you don't pick up and you don't take anything. You go to regularly scheduled meetings on a regularly scheduled basis. You know, you have a sponsor. You work steps actively with your sponsor. You write, you share, and you be of service. You know, quite simply, to me, that's the deal. That's it, in a nutshell. That's the deal of Narcotics Anonymous, and I was doing that. I was doing all of those things, and I was supposed to be happy. I was supposed to have joy, and I was supposed to feel free. I fucking wanted to kill, you know? I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I felt like somebody had me by the throat up against the wall. My stomach was tied up in knots all the time. I would get behind my car, and at that point it became a lethal weapon. You know, just get the fuck out of my way, you know, or you will die. And I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't get it. And I went to a meeting one day, and I got called on, and I stood up and I said, if this is real, I don't want it. If I didn't get clean to feel miserable, I got clean to feel better. And that was the day that I began to believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Coincidence. Because my sponsor was at that meeting. And she grabbed me after the meeting really quickly, and she said, I want to talk to you, Margaret. And she said, you know what, I want you to go home and I want you to write. She said, I don't want you to do another 4-step. I was working the steps, man. I was doing 4 steps on my husband, on my marriage, on the dog. I was doing 4 steps on the flippin' dog, you know. I was working the program. I was working the steps. And she said, I just want you to go home and I just want you to write. And I did that. And then I went over to my sponsor's house, you know, and I shared with her what I had written down. And I need to tell you that the first time that I did my first 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th step, I did it all in one day. It wasn't that day, but I did it all in one. I mean, it was very simple for me. It was, My first one was very, very simple. It needed to be, it just needed to be. And so I wrote and I took it over to her house and I started sharing with her what was on this paper. And they always taught me that there's magic. There's magic when you put the pen to the paper, and that things will come out that maybe might not when you're not journaling and things. And that was one of the tools that I was given in this program to help heal. And what came up for me was all of the rage, all of the hatred, all of the anger from growing up as a molested child. And my sponsor taught me that using is just a symptom of what the real problems are. And she taught me that if I don't deal with the real problems, I'm not going to stay clean. What she used to do is she dangled recovery like a carrot in front of me. She never told me that I had to do anything. She just suggested certain things to me. And she told me that if I didn't get that anger out, that I was never going to recover. She taught me in the 5th step about integrity. And what she taught me is that once I share the secret, I don't have to be afraid of you anymore. And I was taught you're only as sick as the secrets you keep. I was taught that the secrets that you keep will kill you, and that they need to be shared. And what she taught me is that I needed to take the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous as a foundation, and I needed to go someplace else and deal with the issues of growing up as a molested child. My sponsor promised me, she guaranteed me that if I took the 12 steps of this program as a foundation and went and did what I needed to do, if I didn't pick up and I didn't take anything and I did what I needed to do to recover, she said there would come a day that I would love and respect myself like I had never known possible. And I believed her, because my sponsor had grown up as a molested child, and she had taken the 12 steps as her foundation, and she had gone to another program to deal with it. You know what? And she had peace, and she had healing, and she had self-respect. And I wanted what she had, and I was taught in these rooms, if you want what I have, do what I did to get it. I believed my sponsor. And what my sponsor did is she took me by the hand, and we would go to a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous first, and then we would go to this other program. And what they taught me there was they taught me about feelings, and they taught me that shame is different than guilt, and feeling dirty is different than feeling remorse. And they taught me the gift of feelings. And they taught me that my anger, through anger I have strength. They taught me that through shame I learn about being humble. Through guilt I learn about values. They taught me about loneliness. I learned the ability to reach out. They taught me that through fear I gain wisdom. They taught me that through pain I gain healing. A lot of people are afraid to do the work in this program. It's the fear that keeps us from doing things. And what I know is that, I brush my teeth because I have a fear that if I don't, they're going to rot and fall out. I don't get loaded anymore because I have a fear of what would happen if I did. I mean, I can't guarantee my behavior. Once I start, I can't stop, and I can't guarantee my behavior anymore. I don't rob banks because I'm afraid I'd get caught and get my ass thrown in jail. Consequently, as a result of my fear, I'm not sitting in jail for bank robbery with no fucking teeth. Fear is not always a bad thing, Fear is not always to be feared, And in this program that I went to, what they taught me was positive and constructive ways of dealing with my anger. I needed to do something, and what I learned is that the more garbage I get out, the more room there is for God's love to come and fill me up. And I don't know about you, but I hated me so much when I got here that I wanted that garbage out. I cried all the time when I got here. I thought there was something very, very seriously wrong with me because I cried all the time. And you know what people told me? They said, Margaret, every time you cry, God's removing something from you that you don't need anymore. They called it spiritual surgery, and they said it's okay. And what I understood is that, I would go on oh man, I'd be driving down the freeway and somebody would cut me off and I would be like, fuck you, asshole! And I would be so mad and it would just trip me out for the whole day, I was, you got my space, that was my space, and, it was like I would go on one of these, crying jags for, a week or something, and I'd be back on the freeway again and somebody would cut me off and I'd go, God bless you, asshole, And they said, you know what, it's progress, not perfection. You know, I'll take it. You know, and every time that I would cry, it would be, you know what, I would just ask God to take whatever it was because I didn't want it. You know, and I'd get to these places where I would just go, you know what, I choose God's love, I choose God's love, I choose God's love, I choose God's love, I choose God's love. You know what, because there were times during the process of doing the work that I had to do that I felt like I was dying. I felt like there was a part of me that was just dying, and I used to lay in this field across from where I lived, and it would usually be at night, and I'd be laying out there, and I'd be looking up at the stars and the moon, and I'd be talking to God, and I'd say, you know, just take it, whatever it is you need, just take it, you know, please. I wanted that garbage out. I wanted God's love. I wanted God's love to come and fill me up, you know. There was a song at that time, I think it was Foreigner that did it. I'm not sure. It was, I want to know what love is. I know you can show me. Do you know? Foreigner. That song that came out right after I got clean, and you know, and I'd be driving down the freeway, and that song would come on, and I'd have tears streaming down my face. And I would sing as loud as I could. I want to know what love is, and I know you can show me. And I kept showing up. You know, when I went to this program, and they taught me positive and constructive ways of dealing with my anger, you know. And what they taught me was they taught me to beat up pillows with tennis rackets. You know, and I got to tell you, I felt really stupid. I felt really stupid beating up pillows with tennis rackets. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. I did not like it. I did not want to do it. But again, my sponsor would say, Margaret, if you don't get the anger out, you're not going to recover. You know, and I would go there and I would do it, and during that time, you know what my husband chose to use? And I chose to get divorced. Because I was taught that, you know what, my recovery has to come first. It has to come before husbands or marriages or families or schools or jobs or anything else. I was taught that, you know what, I have to stay clean for me, and my recovery has to come before anything else. And you know what, that's just how it was for me. I couldn't handle living with somebody that was using and lying and in that type of lifestyle. I couldn't handle it, you know, and I had to get divorced. And I learned that, you know what, you can get divorced and you don't have to use. You know, you don't have to use. I learned there were meetings that I could go to, tears streaming down my face, and people said, Margaret, you know what, you just don't pick up, you don't take anything, and you keep coming back because we love you, honey. You know, and I'd been in therapy, you know. There's this like big debate about therapy. You know, it's like therapy program, therapy steps, therapy meetings. And you know what? I don't get into that debate. It took what it took for me. And again, it's not negotiable. It's not debatable. This is just simply my experience. And my sponsor taught me that you incorporate these 12 steps into who and what you are. You know, I don't sit in these rooms. I don't live in these rooms, man. I live out there. I live on Reality Boulevard. That's where I fucking live, you know, and I need these steps, and that's where I take them. I take God in these steps because, quite frankly, you won't all fit in my car when I leave a meeting, you know? I don't take you with me, you know? I take God in these 12 steps, and you know what? I walked into therapy one day, and I had this big smile on my face, like, oh, I don't even know why I'm here anymore, you know? I'm doing so well. And my therapist just looked at me and she said, fine, then don't recover. You know, and there was something inside of me that just snapped. You know, it just snapped. And there was no God in my life. There was no Narcotics Anonymous in my life. There was no 12 steps in my life. There was no love in my life. You know what? The only thing that there was at that moment was that rage. It was just that rage that I had carried around for so many years. And I looked at my therapist, and I grabbed a pillow, and I grabbed a tennis racket. You know what? And all the people that had hurt me were inside of that pillow. And I started beating it and beating it and beating it and beating it. You know what? And I threw down my tennis racket, and I said, I'm tired of beating up pillows with tennis rackets. I want to rip their fucking heads off. And my therapist just smiled, you know, and she said, fine. She handed me 3 phone books, and she said, here, rip their heads off. I was like, yes. And I opened up the first one and I started ripping him up, and I started with my uncle and I went through his eyes and his nose and his mouth and I went all the way down his body. And I went to the next one and the next one and the next one. And as I was ripping him up, I was putting him into this little trash can with this little trash can liner in it, And when I got done ripping them all up, I looked at my therapist and I said, I feel like pouring gasoline on him and lighting him on fire. And she said, fine, grab your bag and your lighter and come with me. And I was like, oh, yes, 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 yes. Finally, somebody was giving me permission to be angry. I grew up my whole life with having visions of taking these people and tying them up to chairs and cutting them with knives because they hurt me, and I wanted to hurt them back. And I would immediately feel guilty for thinking those things because I wanted to be a nice girl. And nice girls don't tie people up to chairs and cut them with knives. And finally, somebody was saying, get angry. It's okay. You deserve to be angry. And I took that bag outside, and I took my lighter outside, and I lit them on fire, man. And I loved it. I fucking loved it. I was watching them burn, man. I was watching the skin peel away from their bones. Their faces were melting. I was like, I can't spit because he's too close. I'd be like, I was spitting on him, I loved it. And it was a little bit windy that day, and my therapist went in and she got this little bucket of water, and I had to put the fire out, and I was like, it wasn't enough, but what do you do after you rip them up and set them on fire? There's like just this ash stuff left, and I had to clean them up, and I'm putting them in the Dipsy dumpster, I'm spitting on them, and I went into the bathroom to wash the newsprint and wet ashes off of my hands, and I got into there and I didn't recognize the person that was looking back at me. And what I understood is that I had the ability to kill. And what came back into my mind was the program of Narcotics Anonymous and the 12 steps, and particularly steps 6 and 7. And in step 6, my sponsor taught me about willingness. And it was the willingness that I had to own my part of the action. Where had I placed myself in a position to be harmed? I started out as 5 years old as a victim, but it didn't take me very long to become a volunteer. And that's what I had to own. I got beat up all those times because I was in a place that I was afraid I wasn't going to get something that I need, or I was going to lose something that I had. I had to own that. I had to own that I placed myself in that position. In the 7th step, my sponsor taught me about being humble. And all that means is that I had to ask God in. I looked up the word humble in the dictionary. My sponsor taught me to use a dictionary. If there's a word that you don't understand when you're reading our literature, please pick up a dictionary and find out what it means. It may be the one word that saves your life, and humble meant not proud or haughty, and it was just about asking God in. I asked God. It doesn't say anywhere in the 7th step that Margaret humbly removed her shortcomings. It doesn't say that. And what I understood in that bathroom is that my anger was my character defect, and I was the one that was coming up short in life by carrying it around. And what I did is that as I was washing my hands, I started to pray, and I asked God, please take away that hatred, please take away that anger, and please take away those people, because I didn't want to carry them around anymore. And I went back into my therapist's office, and I sat down, and she looked at me, and she said, how do you feel? And I said, I feel like I have little holes all over inside of me. And each one of those holes represented one of those people that I had just torn apart and burned. But what I saw in my mind that was going on in my body was me when I was 5 years old, when the molest began. And what happened is that little girl walked up to each one of those holes, and she took out a piece of her heart, and she closed it. And it was the first time in my life that I understood that I wasn't bad, dirty, and that I wasn't guilty, and that it wasn't my fault. And I began to understand the healing process that takes place in this program when we're willing to do the work. People say it isn't easy to stay clean, and I got to tell you that it isn't always easy. It isn't. I used to get out of therapy, and I would end up at my sponsor's house. It was like my car was on autopilot, And I would end up at my sponsor's house, and I'd knock on her door, 10 o'clock at night, you know, tears streaming down my face, and my sponsor would take me up the stairs to her room, and she would lay me down on her bed, and she would cover me up with a comforter, and she would lay down next to me, and she would just put her arm around me. And she used to say, Margaret, sometimes you just gotta hurt, but you don't pick up today. You know, and for if there's any newcomers that are in here, you know what? It isn't always pretty in here, and sometimes you gotta hurt, but you don't pick up, and that's where the healing takes place. You can't heal what you won't feel. You know, and what I found is that, you know what, there came that day that I got to look in the mirror, and I got to love and respect myself like I'd never known possible. You know, I got to learn about the healing process that goes on in these rooms, and, you know, I got divorced, and then I had to learn how to date and not have sex. You know, that was so hard. You know, I mean, well, it was. You know, I mean, I walked into these rooms like with my vagina on my sleeve, you know? And you see us every day. We walk through the door. There it is, right there, you know? Yes. And what I want to say is that, you know what, that when you see somebody walking through the doors like that, women, when you see a woman walking through the doors like that, women, when you see a woman walking through the doors like that, please grab that woman. Please, don't look at her and go, bitch. You know, please grab that woman, take her under your wing. Please love her, because I can guarantee you at that point she doesn't have the ability to love herself. And if you aren't giving her the attention, she'll go to wherever it is she gets the attention. You know, and I learned that the women recover with the women and the men recover with the men, you know, and I just want to say this. I was at a meeting not too long ago. I had some friends from Seattle visiting in Arizona and a friend from Utah, and we went to a meeting, and it was across the street from a recovery house, a women's recovery house, and there was all these newcomers in there, and they were talking about being, you know, this one woman came in and she was beat up. She was beat up bad. She was beat up really, really bad, and it really affected the other women that were in that meeting. And after the meeting, we got back in the car, and there was, one of my friends said, you know, the women come in here a lot of times and their bruises are on the outside, and the men come in here and their bruises are on the inside. You know, and I can't address men's issues because I'm not a man, but what I can say is, men, you know where your bruises are, you know where you hurt, you know how to help heal. And please grab your brother when he comes in. Grab him, because if you're not grabbing him, women will. It's a program of attraction, you know? That's kept some people clean, you know, no judgment, just saying, you know. But please, you know, that's how we help each other around here. Okay, I had to learn how to date, not have sex, you know. I learned the don't shave your leg theory, you know. I will not sleep with somebody for the very first time unless my legs have been shaved. You know, I won't. I have my standards. You know, I do. I ran around this program with hairy legs a lot. You know, hairy legs. If I even thought there was, like, I might even think about having sex with somebody, like, no, don't shave your legs. You know, just don't shave your legs. You'll be all right. You know. I had to put people on 50 hours. I told them, okay, I'm willing to go out with you, and, you know, if you're willing to spend 50 hours with me with no sex, you know, and meeting time doesn't count. You know, I figured, well, the whole thing was is that, you know what, I wanted to know who I was going to be sharing my body with. I respected myself, and I wanted to know. I did. And I figured that if you spent 50 hours with me, at the end of 50 hours, I was going to get a pretty good idea of who you were, and you'd get a pretty good idea of who I was, you know. And I figured that at the end of 50 hours, I'd either have a really good friend or a really good lover, you know. I met a guy, he had a motorcycle, I liked his bike, you know, and I got on our first date was on Mother's Day, and he took me to go meet his grandmother, and I thought, oh, how sweet is that? Oh my God, you know, and so then we went for a drive by Coyote Lake, you know, and it was like the sun was setting in the hills, and it was beautiful, and okay, well, I gave him a blowjob right there, you know, and that's not perfection, you know. Well, we stayed together for 4 years, you know, so it wasn't a bad thing, you know, and it was cool. You know what, and for the first time in my life, I found out that I could have a warm and kind and loving relationship with a man. And that we didn't have to attack each other's self-esteem or ego, and we didn't have to put each other down. You know, I've been at that place in my life where, you know what, I had to make you wrong in order to be able to see myself as right. And I had to judge you as not being spiritual in order to be able to see myself as spiritual. You know, that was my take the steps in tradition as club phase. You know, and it just happens. You know, we cycle in recovery. And if you're new, please know that. We cycle. We cycle in recovery. We have, you know, I mean, it's kind of a general thing, but usually, you know, we come in here and we clean up and we start feeling better, we start working steps, we start getting some self-esteem, you know. About 3 years or so, give or take, we usually, if we're not already in a, you know, pretty strict profession or career, we want to become chemical dependency counselors and save the world, you know, and we want to go back to school and we want to get better, you know, we want to get a higher education and, you know, and I started doing that. I started going to school, you know, I wanted to go to school and I thought I wanted to be a chemical dependency counselor, you know, and my stepmother said something to me which made perfect sense. She said, Margaret, you've always liked to play more than you like to work. Why don't you become a recreational therapist? You know, and that made sense. I started going to school, you know, I was going for an AA degree in recreational therapy and developmental disabilities, and in my first quarter I took 10 units and I passed with straight A's. You know, I got my report card in the mail and it said grade point average 4.0. You know, you're looking at a woman who grew up thinking her IQ was 4.0. You know, we are so intelligent if we just give ourselves the chance to be. You know, and so I went. The next quarter I thought, well, you know, if a little is good, more's got to be better, you know, so I went from 10 units to 16 units, you know, because I'm a good addict, and I had my Mr. Wonderful, you know, and I was doing hair and nails out of my house, and I, you know, got to the point where I knew I needed to have like a real job, but I didn't have 40 hours a week to give to a real job, you know, and I started coming up on my 4 years, and you know what, all of a sudden life started getting really, really big, and my guy came to me and he said, Margaret, I love you. But you know what? I need to follow my lifelong dream. And in a few months in the summertime, I'm going to take off on my motorcycle with my best friend. And I'm going to, you know, travel across the country. And I'm not sure I'm coming back. You know what? And all of a sudden in the areas of jobs and school and finances and relationships, life got really big. Life got really big. And you know what? I was too embarrassed to go to meetings and share with you what was going on inside for me. I mean, I was like Ms. Recovery, you know? I got to the point for the first time in my recovery where I lost hope. I lost hope. And I wanted to die. And I sat on the steps of a dentist's office next to my house one night and I thought about picking up. And I saw this woman walking down the road, and she was loaded, man. She was staggering, she was slurring, she was ugly. She was ugly. And I knew that if I picked up, I was going to look like her, and I didn't want to look like that. And the only other solution I could come up with at that time is that I wanted to die. I was too embarrassed to tell you that I had no hope. I was also taught in these rooms that you pick up a phone, not a drug, and I called my sponsor. And I shared with my sponsor what was going on with me. And I shared with her that I wanted to die. And she said, Margaret, please, please, just don't pick up. Don't take anything. And please, just make it to the next meeting. Don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens, Margaret. She said, I promise you that miracle will happen. And my sponsor called suicide prevention, and they called me twice. But you know what? I had come up with the solution because this program's taught me solutions. And I had it. I had the solution. I just wanted to die. Except this program had taught me to be responsible, so there were like a few things I had to do before I could kill myself. So I was figuring it all out, you know. I'm like, okay, well, you gotta make out a will, and you got to take out a life insurance policy, and then you got to clean up all the things around your house so that nobody has to come in after you're dead to clean them up, you know. And my sponsor used to say things to me like, Margaret, get off the cross, we can use the wood, you know. And I was like, okay. Then I had to figure out how I was going to kill myself to make it look like an accident so the life insurance policy would pay off so my boyfriend would get the money before he went on a summer trip so he could have a good time, you know? And it took me 3 days to be able to get this all figured out, you know, and he didn't know I was going to kill myself, you know, and nobody knew, just me and God knew that one, you know. And then I had to make sure that my dog was taken care of, you know. So, okay, I finally had it all figured out, you know. I was living in San Jose. My girlfriend lived in Stockton, you know, and I thought, okay, well, if I take the dog to Stockton and leave her with Marge, she'll be okay. Marge will take care of her, you know. She's a good co like that, you know. I had good co's in my life at that point, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to go late at night, and then I'm going to run my car off a cliff, you know. It'll look like I fell asleep at the wheel, you know. I'm dead. My honey bunny gets his money for his trip, you know. Life is wonderful, you know. I mean, I had it all figured out. It was all figured out. On my 4-year birthday that year, it fell on Easter Sunday. And I took my car to the restaurant where my boyfriend worked, and I got on the back of his motorcycle, and we went to the bike blessing that they have every year in San Jose, you know. Hundreds of motorcycles ride through here. Some guy throws water on you. Somebody hands you a card. You're blessed. Voila, you're out of here, you know. And I did that, you know, and I went back to pick up my car, and all 4 of my tires had been slashed. And I thought, God really does have a sense of humor, doesn't he? You know? I'm like, okay, don't panic, you know. It's all right. I'm thinking, okay, $5 retreads. Thinking $20, this car's back up on the road. I'm killing myself in 3 weeks. You know, it's off the cliff, not a big deal. I have been taught to, you know, figure things out now, and I've got it all figured out, you know, and and my boyfriend's like, Margaret, you can't put retreads on your car. You're traveling too far to, you know, to school and stuff. You can't put retreads on your car, and I'm thinking, shit, you know, and that was when I came to the point in my life that I came to believe that God will not remove character defects as long as they work for you. Because what happened is that greed kicked in, and I thought, my boyfriend made me put new tires on my car. I thought, I'll be goddamned if I'm going to run this car off a cliff. I just spent $200 on tires. I thought, I have 40,000 miles to go. I better get a job, you know? I was like, you know, the sad part about that whole time is not once did I pick up the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous. Not once did I admit that I was powerless over jobs and school and finances and relationships and that my life was unmanageable. And not once was I asking God to restore me to sanity. The beauty of that whole experience for me is that I learned that I can stay clean with no hope. And if there is anybody in this room who's feeling like you don't have any hope, please know that you don't have to pick up and you don't have to take anything, and you can keep coming back, and don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens, because it does. And what happened is I was on my way to school one morning, the radio was playing, I was on those flippin' tires. I had a resentment against those tires for quite some time, I have to tell you that. I did a 4-step on them, you know, I did. Fucking tires! I was on my way to school one day, and the radio was playing, and I realized that my fingers were tapping, and my foot was tapping to the music, and it was like one of those wonderful ahas, you know? And what I understood is that the hope comes back. It returns. We cycle through things. You know what? Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life spin out of control, and I'm trying to catch up to it, going, hey, wait for me, you know? We cycle. Sometimes I feel like there's a veil between me and my life, and I can kind of see it, but I'm not touching it. And what I've learned is I just keep doing the same things. I keep doing the same things that work today. I do them tomorrow. You know, they told me if it works, don't fix it. You know? And I'm so grateful for that. In the 8th step, my sponsor taught me about brotherly love. And what I learned is that, you know what, I'm no different than you, and you're no different than me. You know, I'm no better than, I'm no less than. I am a woman among women. I'm a worker among workers. You know what, I'm just a woman in recovery. You know, I had my own little Harley at that time, and I had my leathers and my Harley honey bandana, and I'd be riding to a meeting, you know, and I'd pull up to a stoplight, and there was a car full of old people next to me, and they like had fear in their eyes, you know, and I wanted to put this big sign that said, but I'm clean and I'm a nice girl, you know, and And what I started to learn about was the prejudice that we have sometimes about when I'm looking at you through my ego eyes, my ego will see the differences. I see that you don't look like me, you don't talk like me, maybe you have a different kind of motorcycle than me, maybe you have a different kind of car than me. You know, my eyes will see the differences. What I learned is that if I travel from my ego eyes down to my heart, this is where we speak the same language. They told me, look for the similarities, not the differences. Connect with the feelings that are being shared. And what I know is that I cry just like you do. I hurt just like you do. I laugh just like you do. You know what? It's our disease that brings us into these rooms, and it's the solution that keeps us here. You know, that's the ties that bind us together. You know, that's what keeps us going on here. In the 9th step, my sponsor taught me about discipline. And you know what? I had to keep making amends. And some of my amends were financial, and I had to pay, you know, $5, $10 a month, whatever I could, you know. But to keep doing it, it was the discipline of it. And in the 10th step, she taught me about perseverance. You know, and I have to keep looking at who am I? What kind of energy am I putting out into the world? You know, I have to be able at the end of the day to look at, to go back through my day, and I get to give myself a pat on the back when I've done good, you know, and I get to say, you know, Margaret, maybe you could try a different kind of a thing, you know, and, you know, maybe you could have been a little bit more honest. Maybe you could have been a little bit more tolerant. Maybe you could have been a little bit more kind. Maybe you could have been a little bit more gentle. You know, how do I want people to treat me? You know, and I need to learn to treat people that way. You know, when my guy left that summer, he left and he came back, you know, and the next summer he left again, and he called me from Portland, Maine, and he said, Margaret, I decided to stay here and fish for the winter. You know, do you want to come? And I was like, state of California was paying for my school, my tuition, my parking, my supplies, and my gas. I was 3/4 away from my degree. And I said, sure, I'll be right there. Packed up 22 boxes, sent them, you know, UPS, got the dog and the cat, got on a plane, and off I went to Portland, Maine. You know, I'm California born and raised, and I'll tell you, you know, I took my dog for a walk one night. You know, I'm walking my dog around, and maybe you know this, maybe some of you know this. I did not know this. I did not know that when it gets cold enough, the hair in your nose freezes. I couldn't believe it. I went inside the house, I called my sponsor in California and went, oh my God, the hair in my fucking nose is frozen. She said, Margaret, don't pick up and don't take anything and just keep coming back. We love you, honey. And I found out there is recovery alive and well in Portland, Maine. You know what? My guy picked up a motorcycle, and if you don't know what this is, it's okay. He bought me a 53 pan lower, 78 shovel upper, you know, nice wide glide. That was the nicest ride I've ever put my ass on, you know, and you know what? I got to ride cross country with him from Portland, Maine to California, and what I got to see was the fellowship alive and working in our lives. You know, we'd roll into a little town and we'd be in our leathers, we'd have bugs in our teeth, you know, and stuff, and we'd go to a meeting and people would invite us to their homes, you know, and it was really obvious that we were like visitors, you know, and people would invite us, so they'd say, come over and have a shower, and please, you know, have a meal with us, you know, spend the night, you know. And it was great, and I got to see the love in this fellowship and the trust, you know, that we get to earn, and it was incredible. And we got back to California and decided that we were going to move to Phoenix, Arizona, and go to school. We were going to live there for a year, go to school, and move back to San Jose and open up a little motorcycle repair shop, you know. And I was taught you plan the plans, not the results. And we moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and what happened is that within an 8-month period of time, my 4-year relationship ended. 8 people died. One of my parents was diagnosed with cancer, and 3 of my cats got killed. And I thought, Phoenix sucks, man. I want to go home. And you know what? That didn't happen. That didn't happen. What did happen for me is that another cycle on the road of recovery is that, you know what, I had to change my perspective and how I felt about God. Now, you know what, I came into these rooms and I heard about this warm and kind and loving, caring God who hits you upside the head with 2x4s to get your attention, who makes you sick to slow you down, you know, and at that point in my life, everything was an act of God. God was doing things to me. If it's God's will for me, you know, then this will happen, and that will happen, and if it's not God's will, then that won't happen, and I was into that. God was doing things to me, and what happened is I got to this place in my life where, I could not get up in the morning and turn my will and my life over to the care of God, who was going to take away my 4-year relationship to see if I stayed serene. And then while he was at it, he was going to kill off 4 of my family members and 4 of my friends, give one of my parents cancer, and just for kicks and giggles, kill off 3 of my cats to see if I remain spiritual. What happened for me is that a whole new line of spirituality opened up for me at that point in my life. And what I started to understand is that God doesn't do 2 things to me, God does things for me. And what happened is that I began to change how I felt about God. The vision that I have of God started to change, and my God started getting bigger and grander and more gentle and more kind. And I kept looking for somebody who had had the same experiences that I had at 4-year relationship, ending, 8 people died, parents dying, And what happened is that, what I found is that there would be somebody who would come up to me after a meeting, and I learned, you either save your face or your ass. And I learned to save my ass in this program. After that 4-year deal of wanting to kill myself, I learned, I don't care where I'm at. I'm coming to a meeting and I'm talking about it. I don't care what you think about me, I'm not going to die behind what I think you think about me, Not going to do that. And I would go to meetings and there would tears be streaming down my face, and I would talk about the pain that I was feeling and the sadness, and somebody would come up to me and they would say, I lost my best friend too. And somebody else would say, my cat died. And they'd say, I lost my grandparent, I lost my uncle, I lost my aunt. And somebody would always come up, and what I learned is that God would put me in exactly the right place that I needed to be to hear exactly the right thing, to give me the hope to stay clean for one more day. And a whole new line of spirituality opened up for me, and for me it was the path of the Native American, And what I liked about that there wasn't anything in conflict with the 12 steps or 12 traditions by which I live my life. It was in complete harmony, and it teaches respect and unity and harmony. It teaches me to honor my past because it's my teacher. It teaches me to honor my present, for it's my creation. It teaches me to honor my future, for it's my inspiration. It teaches me to walk with a light step and a true tongue. It teaches me to just be. And what happened is that, I began to understand that my spirituality is like a river, and it has twists and it turns, and sometimes there's waterfalls, and it gets real turbulent, and it's tumultuous, and it gets cloudy, and I don't always understand what's going on. And what I know is that if I don't pick up and I don't take anything, it's going to smooth back out again. I kept showing up. In the 11th step, my sponsor taught me about an awareness of God, and what she taught me is that when I get up in the morning, tap into God's power. I don't know what it's going to take to stay clean today. I don't know if I'm going to have what it takes, but God does. And she said, if I get up in the morning and I tap into God's power, I'll have all the strength, the courage, the wisdom, whatever it is I need. I've got that. It tells me that right in the step. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. It tells me right there that I'm going to get what I need if I tap into that power. And I can tell you this, I had 7 years clean before I learned to get on my knees and pray. I do not believe that God needs me on my knees to pray. What I found is that I needed me on my knees to pray. And what happens is I get up in the morning, and the first thing I do is I get on my knees, and I have certain prayers that I say. I say the 3rd step prayer. I have a prayer asking for my character defects to be removed. I have a prayer that invites God in and asks me to be a channel. I ask God, what can I do for you today to give back what has been so freely given to me? And what I do is I place myself in the center of the universe. There's the 4 cardinal directions, the above, the below, and within, and I place myself right in the middle of that, and I picture God's arms wrapped around me, and I ask God to walk before me and guide my path with love, walk beside me so I know I'm not alone, and walk behind me so that God's love will trail from me to all of those whose lives I touch today. Those are the things that I say to God. And the last thing I do before I get off my knees is I take my hands like this, and I open them up and I say, thank you for the gift of today, and I will live today well. And what I am doing is I am telling God that no matter what comes my way today, I will accept it with open arms, because I was taught that there isn't anything that God and I in this fellowship can't handle. You know, we are amazing with the things that we go through, and I can tell you I've been through things that I never thought I would do. You know what? It was coming time. My stepfather had colon cancer, and you know what? It was getting really close to the time that he was going to transcend, and we knew it, you know? And I had to go down there, and I didn't want to. I was afraid to go down there, you know what? Because I think people need something from me. For some reason, I think that somehow I'm supposed to take people's pain away, or I'm supposed to make it better, or I'm supposed to be able to have magic words that change everything, you know? And I get scared because I know that I don't have that, you know? And sometimes it's really hard for me to just be someplace. And I was afraid to go to my mom's. You know, she lived 3.5 hours away from Phoenix, you know. She lived 25 miles from town. She's out in the sticks, you know, and there's no way to go. You know, when you're out there, you're just out there. You're there with the fucking cows, you know, and you know what? It was getting really close to the time that my stepfather, we knew he was dying, and he had promised my mom that he would wait till my brother got home. My brother was on a plane coming from England, and I sat there with my stepdad that morning, and you know, he was in a lot of pain. He was on morphine, and he was like rambling and stuff, and my mom decided that, you know, she hadn't left that house for months, and she decided that she could go to town that day. That would be okay, because she just knew my dad was going to wait for her to get, you know, for my brother to get there before he would go, and she went into town, and I'm hanging out, you know, I'm just like watching videos, and my stepdad's there on the bed, you know, and he's rambling, and I'm hanging out, and all of a sudden, you know what, he starts talking about going to the light. I'm like, don't go to the light. Don't go to the, I know what it means when you go to the, I'm like, don't go to the, I'm freaking, I am fucking freaking, you know? I keep trying not to say fuck, you know, but sometimes I'm fucking freaking, you know? He's talking about going to the light, and I'm like, no, don't go to the light, don't go to the light. I'm like starting to panic. I'm like, holy moly, I am the only one here, and he's going to go to the, oh no, this is not okay, you know? And it occurred to me that maybe I was just being the slightest bit self-centered at that point, you know? I'm like, okay, do you need to go to the light? And he's like, where's your mom? And I went, she went to the store. I go, I promise, she'll be right back. I promise. She said, she's coming back. She'll be back any minute now. I promise you, I promise you, I promise you. And I believe at that point he made a conscious choice not to go to the light. And what happened is it set up a tremendous amount of pain, and he started to scream. And he started to cry. And I started to freak. I was so scared. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? Oh my God. You know, do you ever have that feeling where your brain's just going, and you don't know what to do, you know, and you're just like freaking, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want him to die, and I'm like, okay, you gotta do something, what do you do? And it's like, oh my God, it's like, oh yeah, oh my God, and I prayed and I asked God to help me, you know, and it's like, okay, it's like I knew that there was medication in the kitchen, and I knew there was two different kinds, and I knew that one was fast-acting, one was slow-acting, but I didn't know which was which, you know, because I didn't have anything to do with giving him his medication. You know, had it been 12 years earlier, I would have known exactly what was what. I would have known what he hadn't had, because I would have been taking it. I would have been the one rambling, talking, you know, and it was like, okay, so I went into the kitchen, and I'm like, okay, well, you got to do something, Margaret. You've got to do something. I'm like, okay, well, we got to give him something. Okay, all right, well, what if you give him too much? What if you kill him? My God, he's dying anyway. You know, what do you do? It's like all these things are going through my head. You know, I am fucking freaking there all by myself, you know, going, oh my God! You know, I was so scared, and so I gave him the pill. I thought it was a fast-acting pill, you know, and I gave it to him, and he starts to calm down, and I'm like, oh, thank God he's calming down, you know? And my mom gets home, and what happens is that, you know what, we started wiping down his skin, because his skin hurt. And we were just wiping his skin down, and the phone rang, and my mom went out of the room, and she went out to answer it. And my stepdad's trying to get up, you know, and I'm like still freaking going, no, just lay down, because I can't pick you up, you know, if you fall down, I'm out, you know, and I'm like, just lay there. I just wanted him to make nice, you know, just make nice and lay there and don't do anything, and, you know, and I realized that he was talking. And he was saying, which way do I go? Well, how long is it going to take? Which way do I go? And I believe that when he understood that he could go and leave this here, he just laid down and he died. And it was like one of the most peaceful experiences that I've ever had. You know, and what I began to understand is that it doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter what transition you're going through in life. God is always going to send somebody to help you. You know, God is always there for us. It doesn't matter what's going on. And what I can tell you is that the woman that went down there was not the same woman that went back after that experience. You know, I work with developmentally delayed adults, mostly adults, but I have some little kids that I work with, you know, and I have this little girl named Ccrcna that I worked with, and Ccrcna was missing the bridge that gaps the two hemispheres of your brain, and she didn't walk and she didn't talk, you know, she like wiggled, and you know what, my job was to come into their house like 3 times a week, and I would bathe her and feed her and put her to bed, and you know, they call it respite, you know, I'd give her parents a break, and her parents didn't have any family here, you know, and I become part of people's family. That's just a part of my job. I become part of people's family, and you know what? In the 12th step, I was taught about being of service. And what happened is that, you know what, one morning I got a phone call. It was a Sunday morning, and I got a phone call, and it said, Ccrcna, quit breathing. Can you get here now? And I can tell you that I didn't want to get up on a Sunday morning and drive across and deal with anything that had to do with Ccrcna quitting breathing. You know what? But I did it. I got up, and I raced across town. I got to these people's house. There was a policeman waiting there for me. He told me what hospital they were at, and I went to the hospital. You know, I'm racing through the hallway, and this nurse grabs me, and she said, who are you looking for? And I told her the name of the family. And she said, come with me. And she gives me to this other nurse, and as she's giving me to this other nurse, she said, would you take this woman to the quiet room? And I'm like, oh, man. I don't know what happened, but I knew the minute she said the quiet room, I knew Ccrcna didn't make it. You know what I mean? And I opened up the door to this quiet room, and her parents grabbed me, and they were crying, and they were screaming, and they were saying, why, Margaret? Why would God do this to us? Why would God punish us like this? Why would God take our little girl? And you know what I got to tell them? I said, you know what, I don't believe that God takes life. I believe God receives life. And I believe that somebody came to help her make that transition. And I don't think she went by herself. You know, if I hadn't have been with my stepdad, I wouldn't have known that. You know, I never know why I'm going through something. All I know is that the experiences that I go through somehow have meaning somewhere down the line, and I can't always see around the corners, but God can. You know what? And what happened to Ccrcna is that she'd gotten her head caught between her mattress and her headboard, and she had suffocated to death. And they wanted me to go in the next room, and they wanted me to see her. You know what? I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go see her. She was laying there, and she had these bruises on her face, and her mouth was bloody, and they hadn't closed her eyes yet. And I'm standing there looking at these little dead baby eyes, you know, and I didn't want to be there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run out. I wanted to be any place but there, you know, and I'm kind of asking myself, why, God, why me? Why am I here? You know, and the answer that came to me is that I was there because I could be there. I was there because I had turned my will and my life over to the care of God that morning, and I was there because I have the ability, because I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous, because I'm a member of society today, because I have a God who works in my life. I have tools in my life today. I was there because I could be there. You know, and they asked me to curl her hair and help get her dressed for her viewing, you know, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. They had done an autopsy on this little baby. You know, she was hard and she was cold, and we couldn't get her dress over her hands because her hands were so stiff, and it was like I was curling her hair. And I didn't want to be there either. It was awkward and it was uncomfortable, and I didn't like it. But I was there, you know, and I had this other kid that I had to go and pick up after I was help getting Ccrcna ready, you know, and I was a little bit late, and I left there, you know, I left the funeral parlor, and I had to pull over because I couldn't flip and drive, you know, I mean, I just lost it, and I got to this kid a little bit late, you know, I was supposed to pick him up from work, and he worked at McDonald's, and I showed up, you know, and I pulled myself together as best I can, and this little kid's looking at me, he's like 27, but he's a kid, you know, and he looks at me, and he had heard about Ccrcna, and he had known Ccrcna, and he looked at me, and he put his arm around me, and he said, Margaret, I love you very, very much, and it's going to be okay. And you know what I know is that God is always there. God is always speaking to me if I am open to hearing it. God is always giving me a message. You know, I have a younger adopted sister, and her mom was one of my friends, and her mom was in active addiction, and you know, my parents ended up adopting her kid, and And this girl grew up, and you know, she's a beautiful young woman today, and she has her own belief system. You know, she belongs to a religious society that isn't my belief system. It isn't my parents' belief system. It's her belief system, and a lot of other people, you know, and they wanted to, she got married and she wanted to have a baby, and they couldn't have it, so they did all the stuff to help get her pregnant, you know, and she got pregnant, and she found out that that she was going to have a little girl, and she named her Melissa Nicole Mortensen, because she wanted a little M&M, you know, and and you know what? I was working the weekend. I was working in Phoenix at a convention the weekend that Melissa was born, and I got the word that, you know what, something had gone wrong. Something went wrong. And when I got done working Sunday, I went over there, and they found out, you know, that through the labor, nurses, and doctors' neglect, Melissa was born brain dead. And what I got to see was her parents, my sister and her husband. They're in their early 20s. You know, it took 3 days for them to do all the tests. I mean, they really wanted to make sure, and they had Melissa on life support for 3 days, and you know what, I didn't want to be there either. But I was, and I showed up and I supported them, and what happened is on the third day that they knew they had to take her off of life support. And I watched her father, in a name blessing ceremony, offer his daughter to God. And I watched both of them as they took her off of life support. And her and his family, we were all there, and people from their religion, their peers, their religious peers were all there. And what happened is that we held that little baby until her heart stopped. It took 2 hours for that baby's heart to stop. And I held her there, and I told her that I loved her, and I told her that I wanted to teach her about boys and makeup and all these things. And what we did is we loved her enough for a lifetime in those 2 hours, and she kept turning bluer and bluer. And you know what? It was really clear to me that there wasn't anything that I could say. There wasn't anything that I could do to change what was going on. But I can tell you that I was so grateful that I had the ability, because of Narcotics Anonymous, because of these steps, because of the traditions that I live in my life, because of the God of my understanding, that I could be there with them. Didn't want to do it, didn't like it, it was awkward, it was uncomfortable. But what I got to see is that, you know what, their belief system allowed them to go through that. I watched them go through that with grace and dignity. And what it taught me was it took a little bit more of my kind of a prejudice away of, you know what, I don't care what you believe in. I don't care what you call yourself. I don't care about any of that. You know what, I don't think God cares about any of that. God just loves us, you know, and what I keep learning is that I just need to keep loving us. I need to love me, and I need to love you, and I can tell you that, you know what, 2 weeks ago, I got to celebrate the 1-year birthday of my nephew that was born to that sister who lost her baby. You know what? They did it again. They didn't give up. They didn't turn their back on God and say, screw you, you took our little girl, you know. Their belief system carried them through. And what I know is that, you know what, again, Narcotics Anonymous does not put me in a box. This is not the only answer in the world. Recovery is a huge freeway. You know, there's lots of lanes on the freeway. You know, Narcotics Anonymous is just one of the lanes. You know, we're all going to the same place. You know, you can get off at any exit, you can stay on or whatever. You know what I know is that it's about love. It's just about love. You know what, and today I make the choice to love. I choose to love. I'm not afraid of loving. Loving is wonderful. The experience of love is exuberant, it's freeing, it's creative, it's wonderful. The fear of losing that love scares the shit out of me, you know? But it's about making that choice today. Who do I want to be? How do I want to be? How do I want to show up in this situation? And what I can tell you is that when I do go through those situations that I don't like, I get to go home and I look in the mirror and I love the woman who's looking back at me. I love the woman who's looking back at me. I love that I can be a part of society today. I love that I can be a part of my family today. I love that I can show up today and be a part of life and say, okay, God, thank you for the gift of today, and I will live today well. You know, and what I can tell you is that I don't always do it right. I still get confused, I still get lonely, I still get angry, I still feel like inadequate and less than sometimes. You know what, I'm not going to make my parents happy all the time, I'm not going to make my bosses happy all the time, I'm not going to make everybody in my life happy all the time, but you know what, I do the best to be happy myself, and it's pretty amazing that when I'm happy, most of the people in my life are happy. You know, go figure. Well, you know, and what I know is that I just keep showing up. I just keep showing up, no matter what. I don't leave before the miracle happens. And the best thing that I can do some days is I just don't fucking use. Some days I just don't use. I do the best that I can, and I can tell you that some days my best is pretty shitty. But it's still the best that I can do. And what I know is that, you know what, drugs took away my self-respect and it replaced it with self-loathing. It took away my love and it replaced it with hatred. It took away my freedom and it imprisoned me within me. It took away my serenity and it replaced it with insanity. It took away my hope and it replaced it with despair. And as a result of not picking up and not taking anything and coming to the meetings of Narcotics Anonymous and getting a sponsor and getting the literature and working the steps and being of service to others, you know what, I stand here before you today and I have self-respect today. I have self-respect. I have love in my life. I have more love in my life than I ever thought possible, and the way that people show me that love is incredible to me sometimes. I have hope today. Every time I walk through the doors of Narcotics Anonymous and I see somebody else who's trying to stay clean, I know I'm not doing this by myself. I have serenity today. Most of the time, I was taught that if I apply these steps in my life, I can have serenity amidst chaos if I pray for God to come in and be a part of it. You know, I have freedom today. It's the freedom from the bondage of the self. It's the freedom to be able to show up for somebody else today when I don't want to. You know, I have dignity today. I am not ashamed of who I am or where I came from, because you people taught me I'm not a bad person trying to be good. I'm a sick person who's getting better. You know what? It isn't always nice. It isn't always pretty. Life is going to hurt. You're going to go through cycles. Please, please, I beg of you, just don't pick up and don't take anything and keep coming back. And if you don't believe in miracles, all you have to do is look in the mirror and you will see one. And I just want to thank you for letting me be here and share with you. Thanks.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First, I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.